So thank you for joining and welcome to LeadDev Bookmarked. LeadDev is a global community of engineering leaders who come together to discuss all things leadership, teams, tools, and tech. Bookmarked is our monthly book club that takes place on the first Tuesday of the month. So this month it's the second Tuesday. You are correct what day you are here in the calendar. Our sessions cover an array of engineering and leadership books that our awesome LeadDev audience can draw insights and practical experiences from. I'm Susan Bond, and I'm the moderator. I'm a former COO of a scaling startup and a leadership consultant. My specialty is tech leaders. You can find me on Twitter or across the internet at Susan Bond. I guess it's called X now. But you can find me everywhere with my name. Today, we'll be talking about Facilitating Software Engineer by Andrew Harmel-Law, who is with me here. If you have questions for Andrew, please pop them in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and I'll make sure to get them to him. So Andrew is a technical principal at ThoughtWorks, an author and an online trainer for O'Reilly. He specializes in Java, JVM technologies, agile delivery, build tools and automation, and domain-driven design. I'm too excited about our conversation. I need to slow down. Experienced across the software development lifecycle and in many sectors, what motivates him is an efficient delivery of large-scale software solutions, fulfilling complex user needs. He understands that people, architecture, process, and tooling all have key roles to play in achieving this. Andrew has a passion for open source software and its communities. He has been involved with open source software to a greater or lesser extent since his career began. As a user, contributor, expert group member, or paid advocate, most famously as one of Jenkins' Job DSL originators. I think I said that correct. Yeah. Andrew enjoys sharing his experience as much as possible. The sharing is not only seen in formal consulting engagements, but also informally through mentoring, books, online training, blog posts, conferences, speaking and organizing, and open sourcing his code. His next book, which we're talking about today, is Facilitating Software Architecture, and it's making its way onto the internet chapter at a time. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so
I need to shorten that intro. That's a terrifyingly long introduction. I should do less stuff. I keep getting involved.
You keep getting involved.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and my guess is, everything that we talked about there, though, probably has really led you to where you are right now in writing this book. So that was my first question. Like, what's the impetus? What was the impetus for writing this book?
It's a great question. So it's come from, so as it said as you just said, I'm a consultant, so I work with lots of people, lots of different clients, and I'll move maybe once every year, once every 2 years between clients. And typically I'll get staffed as a senior engineer or a senior architect or chief architect or whatever. And we'll typically be there because where ThoughtWorks to help everybody go faster and kind of sort out some complicated kind of situation that everybody's got themselves in. And so I ended up more and more looking at and learning different ways to kind of help unpick architectures. And I rapidly realized that architectures isn't it like one anti-pattern is architecture as the fruit of one person's brain, which can typically get you quite far. But as soon as you try and scale up or go fast, or things change or things get old, it doesn't work. So you need to kind of have this overall overarching approach to architecture. Mm-hmm. And then you hit the problems that it turns out that one benefit of one person doing it or a small subset of people called architects doing things, then they've got all of the skills in architecture, making decisions and all of those things. And as soon as you realize you want to spread that out, it turns out that that's harder. And there aren't really ways that we've kind of got to do that stuff. So I started fiddling around with different ways of approaching it, and I stole a bunch of things from lots of different inspirational kind of places, self-organization and lots of different things. And then I realized that, so I tried it out and it worked. And I tweeted about it a little bit to get some feedback. I got that. Then I tried some of those things. Then I wrote a blog post from Ryan Fowler and got more feedback. So I kind of just grew the practice. And then it turned out it was working enough that I pitched a training course and a book to O'Reilly, and that's kind of where the books come from. But it's totally, the whole aim is like, we know we want some architecture, but how do we do it as a large group? And that's kind of the thing, the question I'm trying to answer, right? As opposed to, based on the fact that the few smart people in the cliched ivory tower coming up with all the smart stuff, and then just everything else is typing. That's never been true, but it's definitely not true anymore, right? So how do you, right? So how? Okay, cool. That doesn't work. Well, how do we fix it? That's kind of
well, and I love that, even though, I'm not an engineer, I work with them all the time, and it really is an organizational issue. If you think about it, it's not just a technical issue. This is an organizational issue we have.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, great. So you're writing this book in public. How did that come about?
So it came about because I've worked with product managers too much. So there's a few product managers, and they're a bit they appear in the book actually, and I'd come up in the old days with all these highfalutin, grand visions of architecture, even though I was trying to do them incrementally. And the product managers would say, how do you know it's going to work? So they'd be asking me to thin slice and to incrementally deliver things and evolve and find, they talk about product solution fit and problem solution fit and product market fit. They were like, there must be a fit for your architecture. How do you know? And you don't. The answer is you don't. And so then when I suddenly think I'm going to write a book, I can still hear them going, how do you know your book is, if it's supposed to be helpful, how do you know that it's helpful? How do you know that it's answering the right questions that people have? How do you know that the ways of explaining it and the structure and the things that are in the book and that are out the book and all of that kind of stuff, how do you know it's right? I can hear them in my head saying that. So it turns out this is how O'Reilly wants their books to be written. But I asked them about it before they said, and that's the key point. So writing it in the open, tweeting about bits of it as I write it, or tooting on Mastodon, and kind of just getting feedback and doing talks about it to get ideas and doing training courses about it and stuff. Because it turns out that what I thought it was what it is two very different things. Again, so like you said, Suzanne, kind of sharing what you think and then getting feedback from people has totally changed what I focus on and what I write about and how I write it. Actually, as much how I write about it as what I write about, because this stuff I think is obvious or self-evident, and it's not. And there's things I think is very hard, and people are like, no, that's obvious. You don't need to re-explain that. So,
wait, so can I just ask for a sneak peek? Is there something that you could think of off the top of your head that you have changed your mind about because of that feedback or the way you present it, that you might be willing to share and give us a sneak peek?
So there's some good ones. So this is the cool thing. So not only do I wrote the Twitter thread, which got some feedback. Then I wrote the blog post, got some feedback. Then I pitched the book. So currently the first 2 chapters are out, and they get released to the O'Reilly platform at the same time as they get released to my 5. I got to nominate 5 technical experts to review it. And then they get given the thing, and they get to really kick holes in it, which is cool. So the first few chapters, one of the big ones is I'm trying to define what an architectural decision is, because lots of it is about decision making. How that currently looks, and my kind of 5-part definition of what an architectural decision is and what is a significant architectural decision, and examples, has been kicked into the middle of next week, basically, and just really. So now I think it is useful, but versions of this chapter that people won't ever see had very different kind of concepts of how to explain those things. And the other kind of thing that's happened is Rita, my editor, who's amazing. The content is largely there, but Rita will completely the order of which I attack and try and explain things. It turns out I'm getting better. I was really bad at that. So because I write blog posts, but a book is different. It turns out. So making stuff flow through at the right level of detail, not jumping from place to place. I used to tease people and be like, "This is important, but I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to wait till the end of the chapter." So that's annoying. So all of these kind of things. Because I thought this was like dramatic writing. She's like, I said, O'Reilly, but you're not supposed to be dramatic. If it's important, tell me. So all of those things, which have then kind of thrown, like I say, the pieces are shifting around quite a lot, which is really interesting. So the content of some of the key concepts, and especially the examples, writing examples is hard. And the order that they sit, there's an art in it. I will never read a book again and read an example and just breeze through it, because there's a lot of work goes into examples.
I love getting the behind the scenes, because writing a book is different. I mean, it is a totally different beast. And do you feel like by writing the book, you're learning more even about what you know about architecture and like the way you think about it as well, not just the
selfishly
process?
Yeah, totally. So this is because it started with me thinking it shouldn't just be me with the job title architect making decisions. And then when I was trying to define, for example, what a decision was, I realized how there's a lot of stuff which aren't really well defined in architecture, because it turns out they're quite hard to define because the edges are quite fuzzy. So by trying to write that, my relationship with it and relationship with I also just took for granted that I would be an architect and I would say things and then the team would build it. And then I'm like, that sounds like a bit of a jerk to write in this stuff. And if you take a lot of it just is, right? It just kind of assumes that the architect has got it right. There's a lot that this is coming on a later chapter, because you're senior, probably a white man, right? And you've thought really hard, so therefore it's correct. And it made me confront lots of times where I've not been correct, which is why I like doing consulting. I stick around long enough to kind of live with my decisions, which are frequently not brilliant. And that it turns out then, so now there's a practice, and as I've used it more, I've optimized more for looking at the problem, looking at the solution, implementing the solution with the teams, right? And then getting the feedback from that implementation and trying to optimize that loop, which again is very product management type stuff, right? It's how do you know until it's gone all the way to prod and people are using it, you don't know if it's going to do what it said. So, and all of that's changed. Trying to write.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt you. I mean, we'll get into more of this later, but it strikes me too that, again, I've never been an architect, but that we can't just like set and forget. That it seems like it's this iterative process there's many feedback loops. Just like writing a book, there's lots of feedback loops in the architecture.
Totally. And this is the thing, and again, there's so much stuff that I took for granted because I am kind of middle-aged white man, right? So I grew up through the standard ways of doing this and UML and modeling and all of this kind of stuff. And it's now surprising to me how little lots of people how much we would not kind of focus on the whole life cycle and the feedback piece. It's really interesting. I'm amazed people, man. And good decisions were made, right? And I'm not to say that smart people didn't make good decisions and do things. Lots of architectures are good. But I'm more and more surprised that more of them don't fail based on, just the way that we've done stuff. And I think lots of it is just through the brute force effort of people trying to build and run stuff after somebody's stood in an ivory tower or tried to come up with stuff. So
that's so great. I love that. All right. So before we go, really, I want to go more into the topic, but can you just give us a high level overview of what the book will cover? Like I know things are moving around, but I think you have some high level thoughts.
So this hasn't moved too much, so it should be good. So the first is 3 parts. So lesson learned number 1, don't propose like there was a 20 chapter book. It's now a 21 chapter because one of the chapters is quite big. So but there's 3 parts. Part 1 is a set of kind of 2 core practices and then 4 supporting practices to do this. So it's like how would I do it? The core practice is a thing called the advice process. So basically, it's like anyone can make a decision, but as long as you seek advice from the relevant people with expertise, and people who will be affected. And then the other core part is writing it down as ADRs, but a way of doing ADRs. Then everything else is supporting. Part 2, and the first 2 chapters of that are out now. Part 2 is the science and the statistics of how it works. It's like, so there's a lot of writing about the art and science of decision making. Lots of books outside of technologies, right? Decision making is hard. Decision making in technology is equally hard as it is in business or whatever. So that's pulling together lots of those parts. And then the third part is, because it's a very different approach and it strips lots away. So there's lots of what I'm writing is like, you need to remove lots of stuff to give the space for teams to make decisions, right? With facilitation from architects. So you strip lots away. The third part is how to protect that space. So the fact you'll need safety, the fact you'll need inclusion, the fact you'll need leadership, and defining those in the context of this approach to say, right, what does safety mean? What does inclusion mean? What does leadership mean? Because it doesn't just mean if the reason I mentioned it, you go back to anyone can make a decision as opposed to the 3 blessed people who've been, their job title says they can. Then it means the leadership is coming from different places, right? The safety is, it's more of a group collective activity. So all of that stuff's kind of come together. So that's my 21 chapter.
Wow, that's great. I don't know. No, is 21 chapters long for O'Reilly, or
No, I think it's in the middle.
It's in the middle. Okay, I was just curious. I don't actually know. I mean, I've interviewed plenty of O'Reilly authors, but I didn't actually know. I've never like counted the number of chapters. So it's in the middle. Okay.
Seems to be in the middle.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Got it. So, okay. So the book is for, I think you said when we talked before this, architects and dev leads.
Yeah.
Right. So what's hard about like why those 2 audiences, and then like what's hard about writing for 2 audiences at one time?
So that's a great question, because there are a few smart ideas, some of which I had my Rita pushed back on, my editor, because she's like, that's too smart. But the big one is like you said, the 2 audiences, because so architects currently do architecture, and so they have the power and the responsibility to do it. But the argument of the book is for this to work at scale and continue and evolve and everything and build really good systems, you need to make architectural decisions across a wider group. So that therefore brings in, typically those are people who are lead developers or senior developers, or individual. You could be in IC or a lead of a team or whatever, but someone who's probably in the standard way of things would move to get promoted outside of a team or whatever to become an architect. So the point here is that that doesn't need to happen, right? They can continue to be within the team and be an individual contributor or whatever, but still take decisions. Number 1, it means I need to kind of think about things from my examples need to come from 2 angles. My stories need to cover two angles. I need to be, and this I've had feedback on this again, because I've got some of my expert reviewers are developer colleagues. So I got pointed out that I had a chapter or a section called "Anyone Can Make an Architectural Decision." All of the examples of developers making architectural decisions was bad accidents, which isn't. So this is not true. Sometimes developers make amazing conscious decisions, right? So that's hard. Like trying to, and it was just because it was I listed off the mistakes I'd made because I was trying to be humble. So Elena, one of my the reviewers, was pointed out. Maybe all of the architects are glorious. They're heroes. They've drawn all these big, they've done these big things, and the developers are the people who've screwed up. And I was like, that's okay. That's bad. So trying to
right?
Yeah, exactly. Or kind of over-indexing on architects who take all the power, and they, again, it's none of these are all cliches and memes. The ivory tower and all this stuff. Everyone's trying to do a good job, but picking that and getting the tone right, and making. Like I talked about inclusion, but making the language talk about, so like we and the team and all that kind of stuff. There's a bigger picture stuff. There's the examples, but then there's just the language I use and stuff. All of which Rita must have thought this was hilarious because I thought it would be quite easy. So all of those things need to be, because I don't want people to switch off for all of these reasons that I wouldn't. They're like, yeah, this guy sounds like an architect jerk. I'll turn off. Then I've failed. The whole point is to go, let's figure out how we can collaborate and pool all of our resources and skills to get this thing not only designed but out into production and learning from it and the feedback loop starting. So,
well, yeah, and it strikes me too when you talk about this. Not that you're doing it in the book at all, but there could be. I make up that I've seen it, an us versus them sort of mentality when it comes to architecture, and like who has the power to make decisions and who gets to have input, and how do we make those decisions? And that's just I don't know if you're covering that in the book, but it strikes me as something that to consider.
Yeah, no, it totally is. And so it's really interesting. So I've got, again, Diana Montalian is one of my reviewers. So she's got this really interesting thing, which she's writing a book about around about systems thinking, but she's got this key thing, which is metacognition. So thinking about your thinking. So she first mentioned it, so I thought about my thinking, but I've realized that I need to put, and it is going into the book slowly, because like you say, if people aren't aware of why they're saying yes or why they're saying no, or why they're including people or not including people, or why they're scared of talking to someone or not scared of talking to someone, or assuming their answer should be correct and everyone should just jump and do what they say, that level of awareness of who you are and where you are in this kind of dynamic team space is super important. So turns out I'm indexing more and more on that as I go. So lots of my examples are someone might, not play by what everyone thinks is the rules. So therefore but this is the, how to have empathy for those kind of people and how to ask better questions, how to drill in with why. And there's a big bit on the difference between an opinion and advice and why somebody might give you an opinion, which like advice without backing it up, right? Without data. Opinion is just like, don't do this. Don't use Java because it sucks. Do you want to tell me why? So
Great.
all of that kind of stuff, pulling in, that's why most of the chapters, which could be 15 pages long, are turning into 30 pages long. What's this? These things.
Well, and I want to get into more meat of this. So like not just talk about the writing of a book and not the process, but like when it comes to architecture, how do you make sure that you get out of the way and allow others to give input?
So it's a really good, so it's really, really good. The hardest bit is, again, so like you can see that I've spoken to loads of people about this. The hardest part is the fear of other people getting it wrong and just kind of and letting them do it, right? Because if you don't, you got to get out of the way, not just for the length of time for somebody to make a decision, which typically might be your responsibility, but to make it and you think that it's wrong. And you've given the advice because part of the advice process they ask you because you maybe have expertise. You give your advice, they ignore your advice, which is fine because they're allowed to, and they then implement it, and then it goes wrong. That's a lot of letting go to do. And it turns out, and this is in part two, the kind of anti-patterns part, you can communicate things without, you can communicate like kind of assumptions of hierarchy or deference and all these kind of things without even meaning it, right? Just, without even saying the words, but just how you say things or whatever, what your expectations are. So kind of having lots of kind of advice, there is lots of advice in the book around about that kind of things, what it feels like, how to be aware of it, how to get out of the way, failure patterns to kind of, if it seems like all the team seem to agree with you all the time, that's probably an anti-pattern because, they're scared to disagree with you and all of this kind of stuff. There are just lots of things which when I originally did this, I thought this is working magically. And it turned out they were just parroting back to me what they thought I would say. So it wasn't even as good as me. I wouldn't even wrestle with the problems because they're doing it, but they're just telling me what I think or what they think I should think. Or they'll go undercover teams and kind of, they'll make decisions but be scared to kind of pay part of the process because they think they're right and they've done all the due diligence and all the work, but they know they'll get told not to. So all of these kind of signals to watch out for is lots of stuff, again, that I've seen and kind of, I first learned for myself and then kind of learned to help coach clients and do all this kind of stuff. Because there's a lot of, because it's very social, the social stuff, which again is very human being driven, it's very interaction driven. And I think, famously, architects and developers did not necessarily get into this line of work because we loved hanging out with other human beings. So, so it turns out that it's like we're very good at interacting over the course of talking about things. It's a nice way to talk, right? We get to show what we know and all that kind of stuff, but we'll be doing things we're not aware of, I think, lots of the time. So just what kind of anti-patterns to make sure that you're not lulling yourself into false insecurity. And like I say, just a bit of narration about how it feels as a developer to take responsibility and be responsible for decisions, and as an architect to let go of responsibility and let other people.
Yeah, it's like really, it's like what I hear you saying in there is that we not only have to be concerned with what the architecture is, but the process to getting to those solutions.
It's the process, not because this is the thing. Lots of the stuff, as it turns out, smaller decisions, like all the things that probably are not a big surprise to anyone, but smaller decisions are better than bigger decisions. Decisions you get to prod are better than ones you stack up. Just kind of standard lean stuff. And so that's how there's this cool paradox, which is going to come up in part two. It's like, so part one is all about you don't have any control, let go of control, let everyone do their thing, which seems terrifying. Part two is, it turns out that the way you never really had control anyway, right? Software is so hard. We've just been kidding ourselves that we were on top of it when we weren't really. But so then the way you get control back is you get more people working more rapidly on smaller pieces of work, and then you build feedback loops. That's how you get control. And you get predictability because you work as a group and you understand how each other works. I mean, I found this really interesting thing about listening to a podcast about witches, which is not necessarily about software, but it was talking about the power of ritual and the power of doing things over and over again, and the fact that it reduces anxiety. And I realized that lots of this was getting people together, lots, and knowing what people do and don't do in certain situations, and finding out from feedback whether that was good or bad. That's the kind of positive feedback loop that you need to set up, and then it builds trust, and all of these things kind of come about. So it's and then it turns out that you build this high performing team from an architecture perspective, right? There's other parts of it, but it's when I've seen it work. I think I took this out of the Martin Fowler blog post, but I've on advice I put it back in. I think it's magical. Like, you unlock this kind of magical human collaboration thing, and when it works, it's yeah. It's a bit touchy feely, right, for an architecture, but when you just let human beings have the safety and the context and the feedback loops, it's pretty cool.
Interesting. I mean, maybe it's touchy feely, but I also think it's just reality, because when I see teams are stuck, right? I'm a former COO, and I worked in the CI/CD space, so like tech, and the reason why I see people get stuck is because of these human elements, not necessarily the architecture or the technology. And so to me, I just think that that's part and parcel. And it's a good reminder that there's just two sides, at least, to this, which is the tech is, and the architecture itself is only one part, but the human collaboration part is just the other part. So I guess it's not too touchy-feely for me, but
yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, that's the chapter one is there's been lots of bits of the process of writing software and getting in this prod that used to be slower, now fast. So you used to have to you write it down, it would go to a punch card. Now it's fast, we can write and compile. You used to have to provision physical servers, and then that was slow. Now they're on the cloud. We used to have to write some code, and then it would test it, and then eventually, as you worked in CI/CD, right? Now a tool just deploys it. All these things happened. And so in the past, being a bit slow and thinking quite hard about a big architectural decision was fine. Now everybody else is fast, and us in our making decisions world are suddenly like, where's the bottleneck? And it's the human bottleneck. That's kind of the thing that sparked it first was like, I'm the one slowing everyone down. And my colleagues had come in, thoughts had come in and made everything else fast. And they were going, right, what do we think you should do? And I'm like, I don't know what we should do. So I can go fast and make bad decisions. That sucks. Or I can think over long and hard and make it's a good decision, but it's slow, right? That sucks too. So that's the germ of where it all came from. It's like, right, there needs to be a different way of kind of doing it. So.
I mean, I love that. So, how, a little bit on that note, how do you make sure you're really listening when developing an inclusive software architecture? Like, what are some of the ways that, you've done this quite a bit? Like, what are some ways that you do that?
So the biggest way, and this is why, so I said there's two core pieces. Piece one is advice process. You need to seek advice when you're making a decision. Number two is, and I went back and forth a lot into whether this was core as well. The second one is ADRs. So it's the ADRs you already know about, everyone probably listening. It's the standard ADRs with one piece at the bottom, which is the comment section where you write advice. So it turns out writing it down helps. But the other thing is, and this again, I've stolen some cool stuff about, there's a feminist theory called argumentation. So the word argument is laden with too many complexities, right? And when you think about it, or my experience anyway, people get into arguments about technical decisions, right? So therefore someone is right, someone is wrong. It's adversarial, I win, you lose, zero-sum game, right? So blah, blah, blah. Feminist theory has this concept of argumentation where it's like, right, the zooming in on the areas of contention is important, right? The pulling apart of understanding and really getting into the problem is very important, but you need to separate that from someone's skills in rhetoric, someone's place in a hierarchy, all this stuff. So skills for argumentation and kind of zooming in on that is super key. And the coolest part about the advice process is because, and this is the scary bit, but also the powerful bit, because anyone can make a decision. And it's like, if you initiate the decision, then it's your decision. You're responsible for it. So that's the counterbalance. But I can't stop you. I can't say really loudly and very clearly, you should not do this thing, it will fail, because they can still ignore me. So then the impetus on me is to say, because of this, I did this 3 years ago. It was very expensive. It cost us. So now I have to explain, and the team can then, it drains tons of, because this thing, I think people want to listen, but because, the power dynamics kind of get in the way. When you drain that out and just go, right, this decision is being made by these people, but let's share the information. It's amazing. I've never seen so many decisions being made so well, so fast by a group of like developers and architects, right? Are not short of opinions. But when you just drain out the power play because people are trying to get someone to go their way, you can't. Everything, suddenly listening goes through the roof. It's amazing. I mean, interestingly as well, I wrote about this in a blog post. People will still say things like, "Oh, where are we all agreed?" And then I'll have to say, "Well, nobody's agreeing. You're not looking for agreement." So the deep-rooted elements of this will stay, and you've got to kind of deprogram yourself. But it turns out that writing it down and just and acknowledging that it's not a rhetorical game, it's a finding the best solution for everyone type game and deploying of your intelligence. I mean, so
yeah.
P.S. This is a general technique that you can use for decision making anywhere. I've just stuck it on top of architecture. So it's this, the advice process is a thing that comes from teal organizations, trust organizations. So
That's great.
And you can just whack it in. Like, it works incredibly well for architecture because you need a lot of decisions. A lot of people need to do them. They're really hard.
That's
great.
It's
just good for us. So.
That's great. And I actually want to take a question that somebody has on this, a little bit on this topic as we're in it. I'm going to read what they said. Was really inspired by your talk at last year's LeadDev. So brought ADRs and advice forum back to my org. People love the forum, but we have a prerequisite of a lightweight ADR. The biggest challenge has been getting people on board with the concept of writing ADRs, even trying to keep them lightweight. How do you encourage people to write stuff down?
So that's a really great question. So it does. So it's. I've been lucky. So it's interesting. Some things will be cultural. Some cultures, some companies will just write it down anyway, which is good and bad, but it works really well for this. So what I'll do is when I've done it, I'll try and model it. So I'll try and help people. I'll try and chase people up. I'll try and, if it's on a wiki or something, I'll try and because you can leave, not passive aggressive, but you can leave, you can prod people, you can be like, da 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 da, this is quite good. But mainly just trying to celebrate when people have done stuff and like and sharing good examples of stuff. So because there's nothing that says you can't go back. And so I've been to clients before and we'll seed it with, there'll have been a bunch of big decisions which won't have been written down as ADRs. I've gone back with people and said, right, this was a key decision. I know you keep having to tell this story of why are we doing blah, blah, blah. And there's they wheel out the architect who explains why. I'm like, right, let's write this down as an ADR or a few ADRs. Then you can see the scope, the size, the focus points of it. It's still hard. So this is why chapter 2 is turned in, or chapter 3. Sorry, chapter 4 is ADRs. That's another 30-page. There's lots of examples. But Rita's probably taking a knife to them at the moment. But there is an art, but the whole kind of the cool thing is you can have as much volume as you want in the comments. You want people to be verbose, and then picking out those little pieces and putting them up in the ADR is good. Other things I've used, it doesn't need to be super detailed and big. You can open something up for advice, even when it's a draft thing, and go, what have we missed? What's missing in the context? When you read, ask the crowd to read it and say, does the context tell you what you need to know? Oh, it doesn't. Okay, you get 3 or 4 pieces of advice, like meta advice. The context doesn't say what the history or blah, 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 or the options, you're missing some options or whatever. That all helps. So when it works really well, you're getting advice on the decisions and all of that kind of stuff. But you can also take advice on the quality of the ADR. And that's when I do it, most of the advice is that kind of stuff. It's me just saying, do these things, do that, et cetera, et cetera. So
that's great. We only have time. We need to wrap up here pretty quickly. This has gone so fast. So I'm curious about something that you've learned that you wish you knew earlier in your career about architecture and navigating that whole process.
That's a good one. I should have thought about this before. I think this might be just because of what I've been speaking with my client today. I wish I'd learned domain-driven design. Domain-driven design saved my life about 10 years ago, and I realized So there isn't a silver bullet, but domain-driven design is quite close. The thing that I would take from domain-driven design, but it pops up everywhere, not just in software, and it clouds discussions and decisions in architecture and software all the time, and it's the names we call things. And so building up skills to learn how to know when there's multiple words for one thing and it is the same thing, and the skill to decide where. So customer will pop up all over the place. Everyone will talk about customer at everyone's company, right? And it turns out that customer might not always be the same thing, or so this one word is having multiple meanings, or the opposite, where there's multiple words for the same thing. So user, customer, blah blah blah. Being able to kind of ask questions about that and drill into that. I use that as a consulting kind of technique, but just it helps clarify so many things because if and in ADRs and decisions and everything, just bringing it in to go, right, are we all talking about the same thing? Because frequently you're not. Or you think you're all talking at cross purposes, and then you're like, no, we just mean this thing. So let's agree for this that it means this. That can cut to the chase. And then you're like, okay, now we know what's broken, etc., etc. So I wish I'd learned that a long time before I eventually figured it out. So
I love that. That's great advice. So any questions we didn't answer, we'll, take over there. But thank you so much for joining us during the session. Andrew will be heading over to the LeadDev Slack, where he will be taking any other questions that I didn't get to, and any other questions that have come up while we've been talking. So head over to the Bookmarked channel, that will be taking place. Thanks so much, all, for everybody for being here.